It is wonderful to come into this next session. I've been looking forward to it for several months of our planning. Last year, Doug McLennan was our keynote speaker and just had a brilliant presentation about some of the audience sensibilities where imprinted on my memory to experience something. Today's audiences have to share it. Sharing as a way to imprint an experience on someone's memory. I'm very lucky to serve on the board of overseers of the Curtis Institute of Music, where Doug is a very active member. He has just led the Curtis Institute into the first ever Coursera MOOC by Curtis, a music MOOC, which is very exciting. But Doug has introduced me to the concept of crowdsourced learning and the power of crowdsourced learning to access what people already know and to create passion among them for the subject matter at hand. Also, at our recent strategy committee meeting in February, we talked about how our opera companies are still deeply rooted in one-way message push. This is opera, you'll love it if you come, buy a ticket. One-way message push. And that we are not very good at developing two-way conversations with our public, let alone with facilitating conversations among our audiences so that we can access what they already know about opera and unleash their passion for it. So it really was important to me that we bring Doug back to an Opera America conference to hear about the dynamics of crowdsourced learning, its power, and how he sees us employing it for the benefit of our audience development objectives and this community impact that we've been talking about. So without further ado, I would like to thank him for a grueling flight today to get here for this session. Let me introduce Doug McLennan.
Hello. Note to self, never follow somebody who's really eloquent and has written out their speech. That's a really hard thing to do, so that was a really rousing, great talk. How many of you are on Twitter? Quite a lot, okay. How many of you have laptops in the room or iPads and internet access? Okay, good. This is going to be a talk on crowdsourced learning, and through the part of it, I'm going to talk a little bit about what I think that is, but part of what I also want to do is to do a little experiment as we go along in kind of this thing. You're going to see up on this screen 4 questions that will pop up at certain points in my talk, and if you know the answer, tweet it to this screen. Just tweet #OperaConf, okay? If you don't know the answer, tweet out to your friends and ask them if they know the answer. Or if you can go online and find out the answer for me, I'd really appreciate it, okay? The first couple of questions are fairly straightforward, fairly easy. Okay. So last year when I was here, I did a talk called The Excellence Problem. Stay in the light, okay. I like to walk around, but they're trying to film this. Okay. I did a talk last year on something I called The Excellence Problem, which was based on the premise that things have become, we have so much choice, we have so many things that we have available to us that we get to define for ourselves what excellence is to each of us. And because we get to do that, the term actually, in a way, has become kind of meaningless, right? Remember this guy and everything is above average. Of course, everything can't be above average. And so it renders it a little bit as a thing that you can't hang your hat on it. And I ended up with this, which was, this actually comes from the Irvine Foundation, and it's one of the first attempts to try and create a map of audience engagement, audience participation, a way of saying these are different levels of engaging in the art that somebody is trying to do. I don't necessarily agree with all of the levels, but it's the first attempt to try and do this. Okay. In the intervening year since last we spoke, MOOCs have suddenly sprung up as the hottest topic in education. For those of you who don't know what a MOOC is a massive open online course. And all of the universities are going into it. All the big universities are going into it, and a whole host of companies have sprung up to create MOOCs. And what has consequently happened is that in the same way for first music and then television and movies, and currently with books, the education industry is going through a massive disruption. The way in which education is going to be delivered in the future is going to be different. We just don't know what it is going to look like. And it's a massive industry that depends on a certain structure that is in place right now. He's going to change the light. Sorry, I will stop moving around. And you can't really see these slides, unfortunately. Can you see them out there? There's too much light. How about if I was to stand over here, would it be possible to kill the light over there? Because it would be cool if they could see these slides. I spent a lot of time on them. Okay, so I'll keep talking while you say this chart, should you be able to see it, actually, oh, that's much better. Much better. Okay. This talks a little bit about what a MOOC is. So it would be a mistake to think that MOOCs are just another form of delivering the same kind of education that we already do. But the reason that everybody's interested in it is because of these two guys. About 2 years ago, Sebastian Thrun and Peter Norwig, who are professors at Stanford, were teaching a class in artificial intelligence. And they decided to throw it up online. Well, that's nothing new. MIT has been putting all of its lectures online for a decade or more. But they had a different idea to try and engage the students who would be part of it. So there were quizzes, there were interactions, there were all sorts of attempts to get the students involved in it. And they were stunned when 160,000 people signed up for this class worldwide. In the process of doing the class, they realized something fundamental had changed. And what had changed fundamentally is that they were actually learning as much as the students in the class. Because when you have 160,000 people who start to interact and start to make things and start to fasten on the things which you have started as a professor, it leads in very unpredictable kinds of ways. So of course everybody wants to get into the act, and so you have the most prestigious universities in the country trying to get in on this. And there are all sorts of claims for what MOOCs will do. They're going to change education forever. Current universities as they currently stand will go away, and the ways in which we learn will be different. Here's question number 2. Did we get a question to number 1? 175. That sound right to everybody here? 175 opera companies in North America? Okay. So question 2 is, how many opera productions were produced in North America in 2012? Is there some sort of central database somebody can find? That'd be interesting. Okay. It would be a mistake to think that a MOOC is just another way of delivering education, because it's not. Actually, we know a lot about how people learn. It's been an intensely studied subject itself. And we have all sorts of studies that talk about how people most effectively learn how to do things. But in MOOC learning, which is peer learning essentially, the traditional model is flipped on its head, where you have an instructor who comes up and tells students something, and through their work in trying to absorb what the professor has said, is supposed to come the learning. In the peer learning version, what the professor becomes is sort of the center of a discussion, sets up the framework for how to study something. And then the students connect up with one another and with the professor, and they enhance it, right? They build on that, and it becomes a much richer kind of experience. In a practical sense, it makes sense, because in the traditional way, the traditional method of doing education on a massive scale does not scale. You can't have one person interacting with 160,000 people. It just doesn't work. But if you can connect them all up and have them teach one another, it makes an enormous difference. So for instance, when you sign up for a Coursera class, one of the things that you agree to do when you do your homework is you agree to grade 7 papers by somebody else, right? 7 of your classmates. Okay? And that's how it gets leveraged. So Coursera, which is the largest one, now has 2.7 million students, and that's in under 2 years. And they offer courses in almost anything you can imagine. First started in the sciences and engineering and computers and whatever, but it's actually spilled out into the arts. And so you can learn how to tell stories in Hollywood, the art of songwriting, introduction to guitar. There's all sorts of things that you can be part of. This is, and you can find musicians who will teach you things. Some very, very good musicians, such as this guy. Okay, we're not getting sound. Okay, well, we'll move on. Basically, what he's doing,
But I thought I'd take a few minutes now to tell you about my online improvisation course that I've created for Berkeley Music. I've been teaching improv for a lot of years, and to me it's one of the most fascinating kinds of music, and I always enjoy talking about it and demonstrating it. And that's how my course really operates. I demonstrate a lot of things, starting with some of the basic grammar of improvisation, chord scales and how harmony moves and so on, and also cover a lot of the more advanced techniques of improvisation that advanced players use, that we hear on records all the time and enjoy, and usually we want to know, how do they do that? So if you're a student...
So if you talk to... Art Tatum is famous for at one time saying the way that he learned to play all of those amazing runs that he used to was wearing the grooves out of listening to other people and absorbing it, so that he heard it over and over and over again, and he got to be good at it. So there's that kind of approach. There are videos about how to learn guitar. There's great flutists who will teach you how to play the flute. And Curtis Institute recently got into the MOOC business with a course on the Beethoven sonatas by pianist Jonathan Biss, which in about 6 weeks signed up 7,500 students. Now that's not 160,000, but watch this in perspective. It's more students than in the entire history of Curtis have graduated for one class. So why do these universities do this? Why give away something? If you go to MIT, it's $45,000, $50,000 a year, right? If you go to Curtis, it's free, but you want to protect the brand, right? These schools don't have any problem in attracting students, but they do have some other really practical difficulties. Okay, did we get an answer to the previous question?
Number 2, we're looking anywhere around
875 productions over the course of the year? That's a lot. Okay. How many new operas? were produced in North America? So we got an answer to that already. Okay. Great. So one of the reasons they do it is because of influence. If you only have 100 students, if you only have a couple thousand students, you can influence heavily those students, but your influence outside of it isn't necessarily all that great. Curtis has a really practical consideration. It's free. Tuition is free. And each student is supported by $1 million endowment. It's one of the features of the school. The founder endowed it in a way so that students would never have to pay tuition. But they did a quick projection, and they discovered that by 2020, it actually needed $2 million. And because their community is so small, it's not realistic to expect that they're going to raise that amount of money to support the scholarships that they need to keep the essential mission of the school intact. So they have to expand out. They have to find more people who want to have a relationship with them so that it supports what the school does. There's another reason. All of these foundations, you might have noticed in the last decade or so, a lot of our biggest foundations that were stalwarts at supporting the arts have essentially gone out of the business of supporting the arts. That's actually going to continue. And in fact, the William Penn Foundation, about 6 months ago, put out a statement basically that they're changing the whole focus of how they give money to the arts, that it's going to be community-based. That means that it has to have demonstrable impact in the community. There are, however, arts groups who are sort of thinking in the community model. One of the interesting ones is the Mark Morris Dance Group. They built a building in Brooklyn, the Mark Morris Dance Center, which is their rehearsal space, which is their office, but it's actually a community center. It's a hangout center. I actually happened to be there yesterday, and there were probably 200 people on the first floor milling around, waiting for classes, doing things. Far more people in that building than there are dancers in the company, right? And Mark is sort of up there on the fourth floor kind of doing his thing, but it's supported as part of the community. In fact, the way in which they think about themselves is dance, music, community. It's an essential part of what they do. Another person who does this really well is Elizabeth Streb, also interestingly enough in Brooklyn. What is it about Brooklyn right now? Everything seems to be from Brooklyn. They built a new home also in Brooklyn, which you can see on the lower right there. And the community is free to come in and out and watch and try the trapezes and interact with the community and do it. She doesn't see herself as a dance company. She sees herself as a community organization that gathers around an idea of value that they have. So another reason you might want to do this is that it actually makes visible expertise in your community, right? If you're doing something interesting, you're probably attracting interesting people with resources. You're probably attracting people who know more about some things than you do. That's a reasonable assumption, no? The problem is, how do you figure out who those people are? How do you actually get to see the expertise that they have? And what you want to be able to do is to be able to identify them, figure out where the expertise is, and what you can do about it. In fact, you want to activate those people to work on your behalf in some way. So we have, in the arts, because we want to be accessible, because we want the arts to be for everybody, because we want to be inclusive, I fear that one of the things we've done is lowered the bar. Lowered the bar in the sense that we devalue. We send a message of devaluing what it is that we do to people, right? If you're a Yankee fan, woe behold you if you go and try and talk about the Yankees with a real fan, right? They're snobs about it, and proudly so. Yet we say, it doesn't matter if you don't know anything. And we actually mean that in a good way. But what it really does is it kind of devalues the experience for people. They don't attach value to it that makes them want to invest their time, their energy, and financially, right? So it's the lower the bar paradox in the sense that we're trying to do something good, but perhaps the message is wrong. And ironically, while we talk about surfing things, we surf vast amounts of information every day, we find vast numbers of things, we're just sort of skimming across the surface. There's a backlash that started to happen. And the backlash is this. People increasingly want to dig deep into the things that they care about. They increasingly want, when they find something that means something to them, to be able to go really deeply into it and invest in it. So the hottest form of journalism right now is not that sort of skippy stuff. It's long-form journalism. That stuff is getting read, it's getting used, it's having impact, right? People will invest in the things that they care about. There are hundreds of thousands of book clubs that people spend a lot of time on. 500,000 marathoners. Talk about a commitment to that. Ballroom dance competitions in which people spend thousands of dollars on the weekends to go and compete in competitions because it matters to them. And because they make the investment, it deepens their interest in what it is that they're doing. I'm not talking just financially, I'm talking about the investment of their intention. So what they're looking for is a return on that investment. And if you can't deliver a return, make me smarter, make me better, make me more creative, then I'm not going to continue to have a relationship with you. Okay, this is the fourth question, and everybody can participate in this question. This is the fourth and last question. What we'd like to do is get a whole bunch of answers up there, and we'll pick out some of them to call out. What would you most like to know about producing opera now that you don't know? Is it something artistic? Is it something business? Is it something in the relationship with the audience? Is it what is that one thing, if you had to say one thing, that you wish you knew now that you don't know? So the way we used to support the arts, the way we used to support opera companies was subscriptions. If I care about you, if I think you're doing good work, what do? I buy the entire season. It's a great way of investing in people. But because there's so much choice now, people are increasingly reluctant to do that. So what is the new investment? How can you get people to invest in what you do? So I'm thinking about this, and what if an opera company was a MOOC? What if you could make yourself into a MOOC? Okay, let's explore this idea a little bit. So there are all sorts of fundraising, crowdsourcing sites now. Kickstarter is the biggest of them. But there's also, Slice the Pie. There's all sorts of them. These are not per se used by most people as a way to raise money, oddly enough. The stated goal is to raise money for a project. But what it really is a social network. It's a way for people to invest in an idea ahead of time. And what companies do when they put a project on here is they want you to put something into it. That way you're invested in it. That way you're a ready-made market for them. they can have that relationship with you. Note that it's requiring the investment to have the relationship. And so often we don't ask for that investment up front. So this is my social graph. This is me on social media, and the people who, I'll stay away from that, and the people who follow me, okay? Now, they're represented by, if you just think of individual people, then you would make all the circles the same. But increasingly, we're not individual people, we're networks, right? If I talk to you and you have 5,000 people who are following you and will do something when you tell them to do it or ask them to do it, then you're a big circle. But if I talk to you and you don't have anybody who really follows you, it doesn't matter what you go out there and say, you're worth less than he is in terms of building a community to me. And what we want to do, instead of thinking of people as individuals, we want to think of them as dynamic, interconnected people. People who will invest in us, and in so doing that, influence other people to have a relationship with us. Now, there are companies now which will take apart your season, your programs, and figure out what are all the micro audiences, the micro-targeting, the micro-subjects, and what are the networks that revolve around those, and how do you get into those networks so that they start paying attention to your part of the conversation? How do you engage them? So engaging in social media is less and less about sending blanket messages out. It's less and less about a marketing kind of thing or just a way of talking to people. It is engaging in conversations that people are already wanting to have and having something to say about them. It's a highly effective way of being able to build a community around what you're doing. This is nothing new. It's just in social media. It's just a massively larger thing. This is kind of a traditional ladder of engagement, right? Where if somebody comes to see you once, then that's the first rung, and then if you can convert them into a season ticket holder, that's another step, et cetera, et cetera. And they're eventually giving money and helping to support. It comes in lots of different flavors these days. Awareness, attention, interaction, participation, loyalty, leadership. And what you're trying to do in social media is to drive that further. This whole industry built up around that now. This is the Facebook ladder of engagement, from just hearing a message to, at the top, actively engaging in it and working on your behalf to do that message. There's a rule on the internet called the 99-1 rule. That means for every 100 people who pay attention to you in some way, 90 of those people are never going to do anything. Right? They're what we call lurkers. They lurk, they might go, oh, that's really cool, but then they move on. You can't get them to do something, to engage. You can get them to do things, you just can't get them to interact with you. There's another 9% who hear your message and they like it enough that they're willing to kind of do things for you. Those are the people you want to talk to. Those are the people that you want to engage with. Those are the people who have the networks and are actively out there influencing people, right? This is, again, nothing new. It's the power curve, in a way. It's nothing new except that now we can track it. Now we can see exactly how it works and what messages work and what messages don't. And so you end up with this kind of periphery of a community that has some interaction with you, but it's those other 9 that help to make that community possible. So as an arts organization, I showed this slide last year, as an arts organization, what you really want to do, rather than produce things, just produce things. You want to become the infrastructure by which a community talks not just to you, but to one another. Right? So the role of an arts organization, I think now, is not so much as a maker of product, although that's what we do to get people interested. It's to facilitate the creativity in other people. It's to build a community based on empowering the creativity that people want to have. It's part of that whole share culture. People define themselves by the things they choose to share. They define themselves by the things that they find important enough to pass on, right? So if you're an arts organization that's just adding another voice, not so good for you. You're just another voice. If you're an arts organization that makes these people, allows them to be more creative, or that helps them pass on their creativity, suddenly you've unlocked a whole community of people who want to have, who value you in a very significant way. Come back to the same question. Anybody who hasn't tweeted in and can, please. So extend your reach. So I'm part of a festival that's on this week in Carnegie Hall. 6 concerts, 5 orchestras, one night after another. If we sell out Carnegie Hall for 6 nights in a row, that's 18,000 people almost. That's not a lot of people. It's expensive to do this. I mean, good things happen, but it's expensive, right? I find it hard to justify spending those amount of resources for only 18,000 people. So then I want to think, okay, so if I don't think of what I do as a product, and I think of it as an aesthetic that gets expressed in variety of products, it's an idea that I want people to be exposed to, then suddenly the equation flips, right? So we broadcast on the radio and 250,000 people are listening. Okay, that's some sort of interaction. That's some sort of contact, right? I don't know what that is yet. We have another 80,000 listening to the streams. Okay, that's more. Social media, people retweeted or had conversations with us. Okay, they took the time to have some sort of interaction. That's also good. And we have another 75,000 people who wrote blog posts, interacted with us in some way. Now suddenly it looks like this. I'm reaching 500,000 people. But I can't count them all the same, right? But they're worth something. They're really worth something. So what if I say ticket buyer is worth the 100% experience? And maybe if you listen on the radio, it's an 80%, and so on down the line. Then I have a matrix where I can think of like, okay, I touched people in this kind of way. But it gets kind of complicated, because what if you're sitting in Carnegie Hall and listening and you're daydreaming and you didn't really pay attention at all? But maybe you're sitting listening to the stream and you're following the score and you're really, really into it. Isn't that worth more than actually being in the hall? You can see when you start to go down and start thinking of it less as a product that you just have to sell tickets to, and more as an idea that you're trying to spread, as an aesthetic that you're trying to influence or inject into a community, it changes the equation of what you're doing. And no longer is it just the live experience that's the perfect experience and everything else is somehow substandard, because that just isn't true. Okay? So I want to come back to the MOOCs for a second. This guy is a guy by the name of Kevin Wurtzel, who teaches at the Wharton School at University of Pennsylvania. I took his class in gamification. His MOOC was the first class in gamification, and it's the idea that you can turn things into games and get people to to participate in some kind of interesting way. It's a very interesting class. There were about 27,000 people in my class. And I just kind of took it because I wanted to find out sort of how this all worked, right? So what he did was he came up with a structure, videos, what is a game, games and play, video games, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And each class was made up of 5 or 6 videos, plus assignments, plus interactions. What happened very quickly, though, was that it evolved into this thing where somebody who knew a whole lot about one thing would get into a discussion forum and start plugging in all of these resources. We made wikis. We made we had ways of building things that took this course in directions that I'm sure he had no idea they were going to go. If you were to look at gamification now, this would be the resource that you would want to go see, because he had thousands, tens of thousands of people building something like this. It was a really sort of fascinating experience in this, of gathering it. So I thought, okay, I could build a MOOC. And so I decided to make this festival at Carnegie Hall into a MOOC. And we created something called S4M University, Spring for Music University. The festival is called Spring for Music. And we put it up online, and we had 1,100 people sign up. And we ended up having 35,000 views of the pages. Some of the music got played. We had examples. Now, it wasn't about the concerts themselves. It was about ideas, using the music that was in the festival as examples of that, right? So the first class was what makes a great orchestra. Second one was what makes a great program. Third was what makes a piece of music popular. Why is something popular and something isn't popular? It isn't quality, right? And the fourth one was a strategy for listening. How do you learn to listen better? And what I did was just go out and video, Leonard Slotkin and Jennifer Higdon and people to talk about these issues, not as a way of hyping the concerts, but as a way of making people better at understanding what this was. So we did things like we did comparisons. So this is one of the exercises, right? So what you're supposed to do, I took the first 4 seconds of the Brahms Tragic Overture, which means the first 2 notes, by 6 different orchestras, right? Well, listen to this. Huge difference between each of them. And then commentaries after them to describe what it was that and then people joined in discussing them. So like, what did you hear? I asked them to very specifically attach words to what it was that they were hearing. That's how you learn to listen. That's how you build vocabulary to listen. And it started all these kind of interesting conversations about what it was that they were hearing, right? You can do all sorts of things. Our budget for the entire thing was less than $1,000. It just took a little time to do. This guy is Will Wright, who designed The Sims, SimCity, right? And his philosophy about building any successful product is to not think of it as a product. He thinks of it as, if I can build something that people will feel like they're getting better, then that's a successful product. He's investing in their creativity. If you empower people to be creative, they'll love you forever. And that's what an arts organization should be, I think. It's not just arts groups that are doing this. It's companies all over. I've used this, I hadn't used this example in a long time, but I'm going to come back to it. This is Netflix, right? Everybody knows Netflix. Netflix's competitive advantage is that they have this algorithm that predicts what you're going to like, help you out, suggest things. But the thing is that the algorithm has to get better and better and better at predicting what you like over time. Otherwise, their competitors rule. So they got to a certain point about 3 years ago, that their engineers, their team of engineers, could not make this algorithm better. Just couldn't do it. They worked and worked and worked and couldn't do it. So they had a choice. They could hire another 100 engineers, or they could do what Netflix did, which was create the Netflix Prize. And the Netflix Prize offered $1 million to the programmer who could beat their algorithm by 10%. Within about a month, they had thousands of the planet's most resourceful engineers working on trying to make Netflix's algorithm better. And they did get better. They got to about 8%. And then they stalled out. And like 6 months went on like this, right? 6 months they stalled out. So then a very curious thing happened. People started joining up in teams. And so a group formed called the Ensemble. And it was a group of 4 of the teams. And sure enough, within another month, they cracked 10%. They got Belcore's Pragmatic Chaos, they're the ones that beat it by 10.9%. So the rules of the prize were this. When somebody declared themselves the winner, everybody else had a month to try and beat it. So an interesting thing happened. The next 9 groups below them all got together. And on the 30th day, about 11:30 at night, they beat them by 0.01%. So there are so many kind of interesting lessons in this, right? Because you used to think that if you crowdsource something, crowdsourced things can't be as good as the professionals. In this case, it was. It beat the professionals, right? It did a couple of other things, too. If you were paying attention to this, what did it say over these 6 months, 8 months, a year that this went on? What did it say about Netflix? It said it must be the most amazing algorithm you have ever in your life seen, because all the planet's smartest people are trying to beat it, right? Boy, talk about brand reinforcement, right? All these people investing their time to try and make something better. And then in the end, they actually made something better than the company could do themselves. They actually accomplished something that the company itself couldn't do on its own. Now, I give a lot of talks about community empowerment, community interaction, and this conversation and becoming the infrastructure and all of that stuff. And it never fails that somebody will come up either after the session or 6 months later, and they'll say, "Oh, I just love that talk, and I got this great idea, and I'm doing the idea." And then they tell me the idea, and basically it's them producing content and having other people pay attention to it. And they don't even realize that that's what they're doing, that it isn't at all what I'm talking about. See, because I think the relationship between artists and arts institutions and community is changing. And the lines are getting awfully blurry. And interaction doesn't mean the artists on one side and the community on the other side. Sometimes you're the artist, sometimes you're the community, sometimes you're a bit of both. And it's a conversation. It's the artist at the center facilitating the creativity of a community. It always beats somebody doing it on their own. It just does. So I think the model for the 21st century arts organization is empowering the creativity of your community. Now there's another idea I want to kind of throw in here quickly. One of the really interesting things in design right now, because of these guys and our ability to kind of see things, augmented reality, right? There's a whole industry growing up right now called interaction design. Interaction design basically is the idea that you design the ways in which people interact with the things that extend beyond their fingertips. There's a whole kind of science of figuring out, it's like, what is it that you want to do? How do you want to impact the world? How does that make you feel? How do you perceive it? And then what is the way in which you know the thing that spurs you to do it in the first place, right? How do you perceive it? And there are all sorts of interesting aspects of this, the ways in which they think about the ways people interact with the things around them. But one of the simplest ones is you can design something that's a pathway, right? If I design something as a pathway, I say, do this, then take a right here, do this, then go to here, and then go to here. That's highly effective, right? You don't have to think about that. You just have to follow my instructions. That's kind of what we do in the arts, is we create something and it's like, here it is. The other way to think about it, though, is to think of it as a map. Give people the context of something, show them where they're located in the context and who they're related to. It's a much harder thing. It takes longer, right? Because you got to explain that context, and also people can fuck up a lot, right? I don't think I should use that word here. Pardon me, they can screw it up. They can screw it up a lot. But what happens? If you understand something as a map, and you understand something as the context and the things which are relational around you, when the inevitable failure happens, because things inevitably fail, whether it's a bad performance or a device that fails, if you're part of a map and you understand the map, you can figure out how to get back to where it is that you need to be. If, however, it's a path, if you fall off the path, it's very difficult to get back on the path because you don't have the awareness of the things around you. Right? Think about it this way. People who understand computers only by, press Alt-Delete, press this, press that, it works as long as you follow that. But the second that you make some sort of mistake, what happens? You can't figure it out. But if you understand the way that computers sort of think, you can usually intuit how you get back to where it is that you need to be. Now, let's take it outside of the design world and think about it in terms of the arts. Are we trying to create pathways for people in which we're just putting you down tubes? Or are we thinking about them as maps in which we want people to be aware of all the things around them and all the context around them and how this piece of art impacts that and them? It's a much more difficult process, but if you do it, it's more effective ultimately. It builds a community around you. You won't be able to read this in the back. So it's Creativity Corporation, and the guy is screaming at the employee, and he says, "You get back to that goddamn cubicle and start thinking outside the box." I like to think of it like this. Here's a box of Legos, right? Think about all the pieces of the things that you do, and they're Legos. And if you give people the opportunity to use them in interesting ways, you could end up with something like this. It's being able to see things within the context of something larger. And that's what our job is. So to me, that's the essence of a MOOC, is the empowering creativity in other people, empowering the learning that takes place in the interactions between people. And if we're to be institutions that survive, we can't just tell people, we have to interact with them. We have to make them aware of the context, and we have to empower that creativity. So, did we get any interesting responses from that last question?
Yes, we did. Oh, okay. A couple that I'll read are, going beyond butts and seats to create a greater relevance. How do we do it? Who are we trying to be relevant to?
Okay.
What will opera look like in 100 years?
Do we care?
Do all producers believe they're serving their community or just the opera lovers?
Okay.
How will digital technology change the cultural landscape and way our work is experienced? Can we make opera interactive online? How do we create new productions of varied repertoire for mid and smaller sized companies? How to cultivate a community of individuals who don't even yet realize what the arts can do for them in their lives?
Okay.
And then I'll read one more. Is there a way to produce opera with the same level of professionalism we do now, but in a smaller, more affordable way?
Okay. Those are all sort of interesting questions. The point of the questions is that there's a lot of expertise out here. There's a lot of expertise. If we add up all of the networks that people are part of, is that me? It's over here. Okay. If we add up all of the networks that people are part of, if we can find ways to reach those networks and have them work on the things that we care about, then it's really unlimited potential. So that's all I have for right now. We have a couple minutes left if anybody wants to talk about any of this. No? Okay, thank you very much. Yep, sure.
Because this is a live stream, I'm doing this on the microphone so I can repeat these for the audience in New York and others. Yes, sir. Great question. The question is, what if we took the concepts that Doug has outlined here and applied them to next year's annual conference? I would love to hear the answer to that.
Really, that's part of what prompted my last question. If these are the concerns that people have, if these are the things that people want to know about, that's worth paying attention to. That's worth being able to do something. Whoa. Okay. There we go.
When I saw that list come up, I was thinking we were planning because these are topics for open sessions and general sessions. So you were helping us plan the conference, absolutely. Other questions? Yes.
How do books monetize or don't they? What supports them financially?
It's so interesting that everybody wants to, for all of this new stuff, this first thing people ask is, how do you make money at it? How do you support it? The answer right at the moment is that, I mean, some of these companies are actually for-profit companies, and they're not making money right now. But for universities like Harvard or like Curtis or whatever, it's actually they're not in the tuition business anymore. They're in the philanthropic business, right? The amount of money that they raise through tuition only covers a very small portion. Boy, does that sound familiar? Right? If you're not in a revenue model, then why are you trying to work on the 20% or the 30% of your income that's the revenue model, when what you ought to really be focusing on is the 70 or 80% that is the philanthropic model, right? You still have to pay the rent, but the point is that if I can increase that 20% to 22% or 25%, which would be phenomenal, it doesn't get me anywhere close to where I need to be. If I work on that philanthropic part and I try and build the community around a philanthropic model instead of the ticket model, then that's something I can actually work with. So if I've got 500,000 people now who have a relationship with MIT who didn't before, and they're getting a little certificate that says, "Congratulations, you've passed this course," I'm probably going to be inclined to support you in some way.
That's the monetization I'm talking about. You're putting something out, and at some point you have to create a relationship that gets them to give you back something with a dollar sign.
And I didn't want to explicitly say that in all of this, but essentially what I'm saying in this as a way of the arts to think about this is that I don't think we're in a revenue model anymore. And I don't think we're in a nonprofit model anymore, because I don't think the nonprofit model can stand to scale where it needs to be in the next 10 or 20 years. So we're in all these kind of hybrid models right at the moment, which are unsustainable. They just really are not going to work. So you have to think about other ways of doing it. Well, if you're only reaching a very, very tiny percentage of people, that's an awful lot of heavy lifting for very few people. So we have to figure out ways to, massively increase the number of people who have relationships with us. I mean, I don't know whether this will work, except I know what won't work. If we don't have relationships with them, they're absolutely not going to support us. But if we can give them something of value, if we can invest in their creativity, if we can invest in the things that they want to be able to do, and it's part of what we want to do, it becomes central to our mission, then we've expanded our community of people who care about us and potentially will invest to us. The current model just isn't working. I also think while I'm on this rant, we have now a lot of opera companies in this country who have a narrow band of big donors up here and a bunch of small donors down here and not a lot in the middle. Where is the connection between, you need a healthy ecosystem so that you've got people who are investing in you at all levels. And I fear that what we've done is that we have interpreted support for an institution not broadly enough. We've interpreted it as how much can we raise money from this? We put it in monetary terms. We put it in ticket sales terms, where perhaps what we ought to be doing is impact on the community, investing in the community, having all sorts of different kinds of relationships so that it's a much broader kind of ecosystem of people who care about us and who are likely to invest in us in some way. But you can't get there from nothing and suddenly have relationships with people.
There you are. Nick. So if 90% of the people are still going to be consumers, then how do we distinguish in the people in our community, how do we find that 10% that wants to be engaged in the creativity, that's going to help us spread the creativity to that other 90% who still just want to be delivered something well-curated and well-produced?
Okay, I should have been a little bit clearer about that, because you can apply that model in lots of different ways. Just because they're 90% and they're not going to, they're not going to go and interact with you in that way, doesn't mean that they're not going to support you. Because if you are helping them to do things that they want to do, they have that relationship with you, right? A good example is there are a lot of people who go to a show and they don't want to share. They don't want to go and talk about it afterwards. They want to enjoy it in person, in private. It's a private relationship for them, and we ought not to force them to. I'm like that. I don't want to, I'm a private person. I just want to do what I want to do. I don't want to talk with a whole bunch of people. Kind of ironic for what I do. Maybe that's why I can talk about it. But we ought to make room for people to have that kind of experience. But it doesn't mean that if I really like something and I really believe in it, I give to public radio because I believe it's worthwhile, right? 9% of the population of public radio listeners actually give money to it. They don't have to. They do it because they have that relationship with them. I could be part of the 90%, and I don't want to, yak back and forth with you, but I'll support you because you're doing something that's important to me.